Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
But, the LCIs, to your point, they're in there. They are grappling. At Saipan, they were boarding half-submerged Japanese vessels and going through these ships, door to door, through these ships, clearing the rooms and having these gun battles. I mean, this is old school Navy, Mediterranean, like Jolly Roger, like boarding ships and clearing them because their Marines were taking sniper fire from behind from these half-submerged ships. It's a tremendous story, absolutely tremendous story, the LCI gunboats. And to that point, Zach, where do you think, if you could rank like 1 to 20, let's say a naval experience in World War II, and I would say at the apex, you've got the aircraft carriers, right, and the battleships. And then you go down and you've got, the cruisers and the destroyers and the flight wings. Like, where do you think the LCI experience, as far as history, ranks?
Honestly, and I'm not just saying this because, I'm in it so deep with LCI vets, but objectively speaking, it's definitely the amphibious guys on the bottom of the totem pole, and it's definitely the LCIs as far as which one. And there's, obviously there's several, I know, several reasons for saying that, because, they're flat bottoms. They were the smallest ocean going ship that was allowed to cross the entire ocean on their own with permanent crews. With their flat bottom, they felt every single wave. So there were so many intangibles of what made it so miserable, but like the seasickness of just moving, even in the calmest sea. There's been poems written by these vets of just how much the ship was shaking, even in calm waters. And just having to adapt to life without the bare necessities. And by that, I mean, these guys hardly had fresh water. They ran out of fuel all the time. Their equipment broke down all of the time. Their bathrooms were basically a slat of wood with a hole in it. They couldn't take freshwater showers. I mean, they had no laundry facilities. And a lot of these guys developed anorexia because they just didn't have enough food on the ship. There's only so much space where they depended on the bigger guys, the bigger ships that you were referring to, that for all their supplies. So yes, I would definitely put at the very, very bottom of naval experience. I mean, like possibly maybe submarines would be tied with possibly the worst. But it's like even submarines, once they were done on their missions, usually they got to go back to land and, get a night or two in a hotel maybe or something in Pearl Harbor. But it's like these LCIs, the Navy, just completely expendable and, completely written off. Like they hardly got liberty because the Navy's like, well, they're on ships. So, I mean, they got to catch it. They're good, right? And like they just never give them a second thought when really some of these guys spent like 2-3+ years on an LCI, and that sounds miserable. So yeah, definitely the bottom of Navy experiences, which makes it so incredible that what they did.
Two things, and you kind of touched on one that came up in my brain, but before I get to that, would it be fair to say when it comes to Navy, obviously taking the corpsmen out of the equation because they landed with the Marines and taking the frogmen out of the equation, when it came to Navy ship bearing cats, would it be safe to say that LCI guys were the closest thing to a Navy infantry? They were the ones closest to up the front face-to-face battle. And my following point to that, with the exception of the submarine, when it comes to, as you mentioned previously in the show, the lack of coverage and the lack of interest in Hollywood and pop culture, Navy overall, I mean, if we think about it, if you take away the submarine-based movies, how many just plain Navy-based combat movies are there? Very few, because when people think Navy, and rightfully or wrongfully, they think, okay, aircraft carriers, dropping some depth charges and shooting, ships 4 or 5 miles away. And so you don't have the intimacy and the suspense of that. Whereas Hollywood says, okay, if you're underwater in a tin can and you get hit, you're going to sink. There's your intimacy, there's your suspense, there's the drama. And maybe that's why they focus more on submarine movies, whereas maybe that would be part of your elevator pitch when trying to get someone to pick up an LCI project. Like, look, these guys and everything you just went through, the hardships, the fact that they're running close to the shores, trying to take out batteries and getting hit by the kamikazes, the risk of the when you were talking about, I was thinking of pirates, the Japanese pirates with the grappling hooks coming up over the edge,
yes,
and trying to come at them with swords,
Yeah.
and that whole thing. It just seems like it's, out of all of them, it seems like that is the closest thing you're going to get to a foot slogger on the ground.
That's exactly right. And if I had to say which one was the closest to, your everyday infantry, the Roughnecks, it would definitely be the LCI guys. And I know Dennis knows this because Flotilla 3, his grandpa's group in particular, when they were at the Palo Islands, John H. Morrell was a captain of the LCI 730, and he was famous for...
Amazing character.
He's famous really for kind of, all to your point, what you're saying is he realized the importance of not only just knowing how to be an everyday sailor in the Navy, but these gun crews that had to protect the troops, they had to learn how to use those heavy guns that they were equipped with. And Morrell, this captain, was made famous because he kind of integrated Army and Navy units together where, before they even go into battle, they'd be bringing Navy, companies and platoons on board to teach them not only how to use the guns, but what's their language, what are common things that are seen, like they need to speak the same language and be on the same page so that when these guys are raiding out on land, take out a pillbox, they can speak directly to the LCI guys that they know. They know their capabilities. They kind of work in tandem together. And that was a big part of what LCIs began to do toward the end of the war, with troop protection, with their big guns. But it's just more to the point where they really kind of trained them to be infantry guys. They weren't just sailors, like they had to be infantry also.
Yeah, they fitted out many of these to be mortared gunboats, and they would have Army crews come aboard and man these, and they would work with the sailors. And not to mention Saipan, where you have these interpreters aboard and you're going around trying to talk the people from killing themselves, and they're jumping off by the hundreds, and then the bodies are surfacing. Well, you can't leave, and so you wake up in the morning and you're just surrounded by all these floating families, and just by the hundreds, and they're decomposing and they're being infested with flies and maggots. And then the flies, these giant black flies, would come out on the ships, and the guys said they were the type of flies that they would actually land on their face and they would get in their mouth, and they are seeing these flies that are doing this, exiting from the bodies that are floating. And all of this is going on, right? This is visceral. This is up front. This is front line action that these guys are seeing. They're taking rifle rounds. They're getting hit with small arms fire. They're at Iwo Jima, as a matter of fact. Charlie Crandall, Lieutenant J.G. Crandall, he went around afterwards and he scooped up bags full of shrapnel and rifle rounds and machine gun bullets and this and that, because it was 2 days before the invasion. So it was his idea. He scooped it all up, and it just so happened that it was also bloody and full of human remains. But he scooped it all up, and they took it to the command ship, and he dumped it out on Blandy's table, Admiral Blandy, right in front of him. And the guys all just started digging through it. All right, what do the Japanese have? What are they letting loose with?
Battlefield intelligence. I have to say this, or otherwise we're going to get emails. People are going to be punching their phones. When I say closest thing to Navy infantry, I think we must include the PT boats in that statement too, because those guys got down. Otherwise, people are like, "Hey, you left the PT guys out." They got down and dirty and up close in front as well. So the LCI and the PT boat guys were, I think if you could almost do a Masters of the Air Band of Brother S series between those two, because when you do a 10-part miniseries, you got to spread it out. You wouldn't just want to do LCIs, but yeah, you could do LCIs, PT boats, and maybe something, include a little bit of submarine to get the three different faces, and you could clearly do a good series on that.
This has been a Digital 410 production.